geologist by training. And he went into the military as a geologist. And he worked with crews that were building deep underground military bases. They were blasting them with dynamite, blasting a hole straight down, and then doing a right angle turn and tunneling, and creating city-sized complexes underground as military bases. And in case there was a nuclear holocaust, we could have a continuation of government, continuity of government, COG, continuity of government, move everybody out of Washington through underground train system, high-speed train system on magnetic lift at a time when this was unheard of, before the Japanese deployed the exact same system in their subway. Get them all to these bases, and there would be a continuity of government, and enough people have tickets on those trains to populate these cities, and the race will go on, humanity will go on. So Phil Schneider is working innocently, naively, he's just an engineer. He doesn't know any of this stuff. He's compartmentalized, so he doesn't know why he's doing what he's doing, but he's earning good money doing what he's doing, and he's drilling down, and they're drilling on the site, and some gas comes up, a very foul-smelling gas, and it's not like what they're used to bringing up from these deep wells. So they call Phil in for a sniff test, and Phil says, "This is strange." So they say, "Phil, we're going to send you down there to check it out." And he says, "Really?" So he goes down, and he carried a Walter PK pistol as his weapon of preference when he walked around the secured area. This is the security clearance for this facility was above top secret. So there were armed guards who wore berets, various kinds of special forces, and had semi-automatic and probably automatic weapons as well, pistols, machine pistols, all kinds of things. I got rifles. There were people whose duty it was, security guards, whose duty it was to guard, and Phil was not one of those people. He was a scientist/engineer. He's gone down one of these elevators down to where he finds a pocket, a cavern under the ground. And he's down, he sees this cavern, and all of a sudden he spots an alien, and it's tall. It's not a small gray, it's a large gray, a tall gray. And he freaks out, naturally. His instinct is to reach for his weapon, and this other thing is reaching for its weapon. And they start shooting at each other. And the other being is shooting an energy weapon, a directed energy weapon, and hits Phil in a couple of places. A black beret who comes down immediately behind Phil in the elevator grabs Phil, slings him onto the elevator to be hauled back up, and that man died. That black beret died, according to Phil.
Oh,
and
why?
At the end of the day, many United States forces, military personnel were dead, and some aliens were dead. All these numbers are available online if you want the details. And Phil developed cancer, radiation sickness from his injuries. And that is what ultimately killed, that maybe it was killing him, but he was found strangled with his own catheter, which was ruled a suicide. And this is typical in strange deaths or deaths in unusual circumstances, death under unusual circumstances, of people who have been exposing and disclosing. Well, people in those days, the 1970s, 1980s, were killed if they disclosed too much. And that's what Phil was doing, because Phil claimed to have physical evidence. He was of that generation who was a boy. He was a boy when Roswell happened in 1947. And his father had given him a friend of his father's, had given him artifacts from UFO research, a molten metal that was not of Earth, and other artifacts that Phil had kept from boyhood and put on display when he went around lecturing. Well, the U.S. government simply could not have this, apparently, and didn't want to wait for him to die of radiation poisoning from the battle down under the ground at what was to become Area 51, or was already Area 51 under development. they apparently killed him, and it's extremely unfortunate. But Phil's message all along was, it is our duty as patriots who uphold the Constitution of the United States to call the U.S. government on the big lie and to insist on being treated with respect and honesty in these matters about this taboo, the most taboo subject, UFOs, the most taboo. You must be crazy to believe in UFOs. There's no evidence for UFOs. All of these things are misstatements that are accepted as truth by the majority of people in the United States.
Yes, they are.
And that is as a psychologist, that's very interesting to me.
Well, what's interesting is that it's a knee-jerk response anytime the topic comes up, no matter who you're talking to. I have found that to be true. I was speaking with someone who is very well educated, very open-minded about most things. We were discussing the fact that I did multiple UFO conferences this year and covered them. And she said, well, but there's no evidence. I said, excuse me? I do believe you're mistaken. And when I went on to itemize a list of evidence that I'm aware of, and I have not researched nearly as much or as well as you, I was just watching her eyes glaze over. And it was so sad because she simply could not have that conversation. It was tragic, actually, because she's just completely locked down, and so many people are.
She is the subject, or victim, I call it. She's the victim of a very capable, well-funded propaganda campaign that began in 1947 in earnest after Roswell, because there were witnesses and there was physical evidence and tongues were starting to wag. And my book, The Top 10 Definitive U.S. UFO Cases, stitches together what it is about these cases that makes them definitive, is that they together, when taken in chronological order, you can see the progression of the cover-up and the propaganda campaign, which is why most people today in the United States think you must be crazy to believe in UFOs. They believe it because that's all they've heard all their life.
Exactly. And
I had a guy tell
it's crazy.
me in conversation. I started talking about my interest in UFOs. I was just talking with a guy. I'd met him casually. Didn't know me. And I got off. He says, well, what are you into? What's your thing? I said, well, I'm into UFOs. He said, oh, you're not one of those people, are you? You're not one of those crazy people who believes in UFOs. And instead of defending myself, I asked him, how much research have you done on the subject? He said, none. I just stopped talking.
That's just
bizarre. You can't
bizarre.
convince somebody, you can't persuade, and you can't educate someone in a 5-minute conversation, I'm sorry to say. That's why people write books. The concepts are complex.
They are.
But when you start to go down these so-called rabbit holes, whatever they are, if we're talking media control, the fact that the Murdoch media empire reports the same news verbatim, script-based news, so-called news, it's not really news, on major broadcast networks. And when you look at the education, the decline of education, and the general decline of civilization, as I call it, in the United States, the impoverishment of the United States, the division that's being created politically, I believe it's all intentional. The federal government wants us divided, wants us arguing, wants us not to know what to believe.
It's a distraction.
So that they can continue to do their thing while we're running around in circles.
Well,
it's fairly deplorable, I hate to say.
Well, it's actually the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I never made that connection I wonder if that author had been visited by aliens.
I would venture to say that that's a possibility because, everything that happens, even now in government, people think that it's odd to actually say that when you have a mass shooting, look at what's going through the legislature. What's being voted on while that's happening. The Iranian deal was Sandy Hook. And there was something else equally controversial with the young man that shot up the church in, was it South Carolina? Things like that, it's insane. And nobody makes that correlation whatsoever. There's always a distraction while things that are negative for our nation are being passed.
I agree completely, and in my book I explore this policy that our federal government, the military intelligence community developed of deny, discredit, and distract, the 3 Ds, along with discrediting an experiencer or a reporter, a person who's trying to tell something about something they saw or experienced, along with discreditation. In other words, they're no count. They don't count for it. Their voice doesn't count. They're not a scientist. They're not an expert. They're not a trained observer. They have no business having an opinion about this because their personal experience, we invalidate it, which as a metaphysicist I never do. I never invalidate the individual experience. It's the only thing really that's important in my view. But in order to cover up the existence of UFOs, they realized they had to use this Nazi tactic of deny, discredit, distract. And if discrediting won't do it, let's ridicule. Let's call them names. Let's call them crazy. You must be crazy to believe in UFOs. But when we look at mind control, MK Ultra, when we look at many of these other programs that have evolved after World War II, they all go back to the Project Paperclip that brought about half of the German scientists, mostly rocket scientists, but other branches as well, into the United States, and the others went to Russia, which is why the United States and Russia became contenders in the space race in the 1950s, because we got those brilliant Nazi scientists who were working on UFO technology. Because guess what? Those aliens had also gone over and had a little chat with Hitler, and they made a treaty over there too. And they were sharing technology, and frankly, the Nazis were ahead. They were working on heavy water with critical component in building nuclear weapons. They were very close, and had they gotten there first, they would have been the ones nuking Washington, D.C. and New York City. It wouldn't have been the United States nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You can believe me on that. We'd be speaking German if we were even here. All right?
Well, if they hadn't gone into Russia, we'd be speaking German anyway.
By any means. World War II was no slam dunk.
Nope.
And young people today may not understand that. I've had people, I wrote an article for thedailyconspiracy.com about simply who killed JFK, John F. Kennedy Jr., President of the United States. Who killed him? Because this is a conspiracy that's been going since 1963 when he was gunned down in Dealey. Was it a lone gunman? No, most people never thought so. Well, I should say, anyone who took a critical look never thought so. And I had a professor in college who spent 15 minutes at the end of every lecture drawing on the chalkboard. We had chalkboards back then. That's how old I am. Drawing on the chalkboard and showing the Zapruder film over and over and over how there were several points of impact. It was not a lone gun. You could see it. It wasn't. And so at early age, I was in college. I was actually auditing a college course, so I was even a little bit younger, 17 or 18 years old. I'm thinking, wow, our federal government's totally lying to us.
And people fell for
when
it.
you grow up knowing that your government is lying, it's hard It's hard to believe what your government is telling you about education, about nutrition, about